Welcome to this session on fashion's 1.5 degree pathway, where we explore what it will take for the fashion industry to stay within the 1.4 degree warming pathway as stipulated by the Paris Agreement, and also, since we're here in Stockholm, what Sweden and the Swedish industry can do to take the lead on this. So this topic, right, is somehow during the COVID crisis, not always in the last bunch of months on the front of people's minds. But it is, as we all know, one of the most urgent and complex questions that we as a society are facing, and therefore why the industry of fashion needs to also address this question. Now, I want to be honest with you all. One of the things that's tough about this topic is how to address it in a way that is constructive and positive, given that there is so much that we hear about that feels so critical and urgent. And I must admit, I'm not always successful at that. But with the people I'm with today, I hope that we'll be constructive about it. We'll do our best. I just want to say that we're very lucky to have a number of expert guests. First of all, a little bit about me. I'm Mike Schrager. I run the Sustainable Fashion Academy. We have a mission to accelerate progress towards science-based targets and the Sustainability Development Goals. And what's unique is we do this by engaging the apparel and fashion industry. One of the initiatives relevant for this talk is that we run the Swedish Textile Initiative for Climate Action, STICA. And the purpose of that is to ensure that Nordic companies and the Nordic apparel industry actually set science-based targets for climate and reduces along the pathway that's needed, and that we use this as a means to transform our industry, to be innovative, and to show what we can all do. I'd like to introduce my participants here. On stage with me, we have two lovely people. We have Kim Hellström, who is the Climate and Water Lead at the H&M Group. Thanks for joining us, Kim.
Thank you so much.
So you've dressed up for the event?
Sometimes you gotta give from yourself, yeah.
You look lovely. And Malin Wennberg, who works at the Swedish Environmental Protection Agency. And your specialty, of course, is textiles, sustainability in textiles, and also consumer awareness and education. Do I get that right?
Yes,
and
that's correct.
Via link, we have Sandra Roos, Dr. Sandra Roos, who is the head of sustainability at Kappahl, but also very importantly has spent the last 10 years as a analyst, specializing in how you analyze the impact of textiles on the environment. And she can tell you more if needed. But she's representing two hats today, both a researcher, the robustness of research, and also now in a role at a Swedish brand. So welcome all of you. Great to have you.
Thank you.
Before we focus on textiles and climate, I thought to give some sort of background, it would be good to quiz you on how much you know about the current state of the climate globally. Ooh. Are you ready, Sandra? Are you ready for that?
Sure.
Okay, so I did some research on NASA, you know, NASA's Global Climate Change website. So I'm fairly confident it has basic good stuff, although we can talk about some of the questions about the NASA site with the Trump administration, but we can talk about it. Anyway, I did some research, and I have a couple questions. So first of all, according to the site, how many of the last 20 years have been the warmest ever on record? Both of you, any of you?
18.
Sandra?
Yeah, I guess something like that. 19?
Of the last 20 years, it has been 19. Ooh. 19 of the warmest years on record have occurred since 2001. Carbon dioxide levels are the highest they've ever been in 650,000 years. Yeah. According to the Paris Agreement from 2015, by how many degrees have nations agreed to limit global warming by? By how many degrees have nations agreed to limit global warming by? Yes?
2 degrees.
2 degrees. Do you agree?
I agree. Yes.
Yes? We're catching you off guard.
Yeah, a little
The
bit.
agreement was
Sandra?
2 degrees. Yes, the agreement I think was 2 degrees.
2 degrees. So they say 2 degrees, but they say we should strive for what? 1.5 degrees, right?
I don't know if the nations are saying that just yet. The scientists are saying that.
Well, they put 1.5 degree in the information
Okay.
there, so
Great.
that's why we're talking about it today.
Yeah, obviously.
Good. All right, we're getting there. In absence of major action on climate change, what do scientists predict the warming will be over the next millennium? So the next 100 years, actually. How much will the climate warm by?
45 degrees?
Okay, 45 degrees.
4 to 5.
4 to 5
Yeah.
degrees. Yes. It is 6 degrees.
6 degrees.
And what happens with increased warming on the planet? What are some things that could be a problem?
The ice is melting.
The ice is melting.
And
And
thereby
more
the
fires.
oceans rising.
Sandra?
Yeah, I was going to say there will be more fires and extreme weather.
More fires and extreme weather. So we have what's happening again in California. What
We
hap-
have climate refugees, people needing to move from wherever they live to a different area, causing mass migration.
Food, potentially food insecurity, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, because we don't know what crop yields will be, right? Biodiversity with insects, right? So scientists seem to say that just small changes in degrees could have strange and incredibly important changes for vegetation. I read about sea turtles as an example. Sea turtles, if you just increase the degrees of their eggs by a little bit, their gender goes from male to female, and suddenly you don't have males anymore in the population. And imagine that happening with all sorts of insects and wildlife and things that we depend on. And then humans, it's just important, we function best at around 22 degrees Celsius, right? So there are going to be huge swaths of areas of the world where it's too hot to function. And I already talked to colleagues in textiles who are in India and such, who are working in 50 degrees Celsius and such. So I don't want to spend any more time on that, but I just wanted to give everyone who's watching a little bit of background to remind you what's at risk here. And even when talking about it, it still feels often surreal unless you've experienced it yourself. Up until a few years ago, I would argue, global warming didn't take center stage in textiles. And you could argue for a range of reasons. The focus was on water and chemicals, on the environment, on working conditions. We didn't really have a lot of research. And then a couple years ago, a few studies came out and tried to show the link between energy and use in textiles. And so suddenly, since then, a lot has happened in a lot of last 2 years. We have a number of initiatives, don't we, that are focused on climate in just a short while. We have a UN fashion charter that I'm a part of, H&M is a part of, working with the industry to set goals. We have the Fashion Pact that works with luxury brands around setting climate goals. We have the Science-Based Target Initiative for textiles, right? So a lot more things have happened. A number of reports have come out, right? And today, I read a report that's coming out on Thursday from McKinsey. We had a report from Stand.Earth, an NGO, about what the industry needs to do. Extinction Rebellion, right, is protesting on London Fashion Week about the link. So a lot more, I would argue, has happened in the last couple of years. Of course, we have the Swedish Textile Initiative for Climate Action, which is a regional initiative. So this is taking center stage now when it didn't do that before. And it's important to note before we get into our conversation that Stockholm is an interesting place to talk about this, because the Swedish government, right, has said that we want to reach zero net greenhouse gas emissions by 2045 at the latest here in Sweden. And after that, Sweden should be achieving negative emissions, which is enshrined in a climate law. So there's no reason why the Swedish industry, I would argue, shouldn't be taking a lead on these questions as well. Okay, that was enough of an introduction, I hope. So my first question to you all, Sandra, you with us?
I'm here.
Yes, my first question to you is not about facts and figures. It's about how do you feel about this? Can you name one emotion that you feel and related when you hear these facts? Kim?
You always start with me, okay. I have to be honest and say that I'm normally quite realistic, and I feel a little bit depressed about this, to be honest. I'm not super positive about the ability of us as a whole unit on the planet right now.
Okay. And Malin?
Yeah. I mean, my word would be stressed,
Okay.
actually. Yeah.
Not a good
Are we going to
feeling
make
have.
it?
Yeah.
No, I mean, I'm still somewhat positive because you got to have that spark left if you actually want to change it. But overall, stressed.
Okay. Sandra?
Well, my first sense that come up was actually determined, because I think that we need to start measuring, we need to start actions. And I think if we can well explain to everyone what we are doing and how much effect that gives and what do we have left, and people can join in the struggle, I think that we can at least get very far. So determined.
So determined. That makes us feel better, I think.
Yeah.
So let's then get back to the information, some basics for those watching who need to know the link between climate and textiles. And Sandra, I want to start with you. I want to ask you, given that you have a robust research background, how much greenhouse gases does the fashion industry actually create? And you and I have bounced this back and forth for a period now. I've heard anything from 2% of the global greenhouse gases to 12%. So tell us in the best way possible what it is.
Yes. The reason why we have different answers is that we include different things in fashion. So some include textiles, some include shoes, some only clothes, some home textiles, leather, anything. But all these reports, they include some part of the fashion industry. And the span is between maybe 1 to 4 billion tons of carbon dioxide per year, or 1 to 4 gigatons, which would be like 3 to 8%, I would say, of the total global impact. But as we also have discussed, I think for making comparisons between different industry sectors meaningful, we need also to think about that a large part of the fashion industry's emissions comes from the energy sector, the agricultural sector, the transport sector. So comparing different sectors with each other doesn't always make sense. But the fashion sector can take responsibility for roughly between 3 to 8%.
Okay, so it depends how you define it, what's in and out of fashion. And
So we are
there
all
are
right.
agriculture and energy, but at the same time, who's responsible for those emissions? Some could argue it is the fashion sector because they're causing the demand to use the energy, to use the agriculture. Okay, so if you then take us from there, 3 to 8, see if I hold you to that the
Wide
next
span.
time we talk. If you take it from there and say, where are those emissions being created in an average sort of life cycle of a product or an average company? Can you illustrate that for us?
Yes. Well, the very simple answer is, of course, that it is from the use of fossil fuel in all the production steps. So we often wrongly get the notion that the climate impact is linked to fiber choice, for example, but it's always the use of fossil fuel energy, so the type of energy and the amount of energy that we use in all the steps that matters. So wet treatment is the most energy consuming step in the whole textile life cycle, which means today it is the largest emitter of carbon dioxide. And then we have the fiber production and cut and sew. And I would like to add that in the fiber production, it's of course the fossil fuel used for the processes, like having a tractor out in the cotton fields emits carbon dioxide. And then we have the other processing, like weaving, knitting, yarn spinning. And in the Swedish study, Mistra Future Fashion study of Swedish textile consumption, we saw that 80% of the climate emissions stems from production processes. And that tells us that we really need to both use garments longer, and we need to reduce the use of fossil fuel in production processes. And the next, after production processes, the next climate-causing step is actually the consumer's transport to and from the store.
Okay. So that gives a picture of where the impacts are, and I hope that those who are new to this understand that that means climate work is not all so much, you know, it's important with design, and we're going to get into the user phase. But what's different here, I would argue, is that we're very much focused on changing an energy system, an energy source, which is down in the supply chains away from a lot of the brands, aren't I right? And where they control directly impacts, right? These are controlled by where they source their resources from, their garments. So let me turn to Kim, because H&M is a well-known company and can be a good case study for some of the opportunities and challenges for our industry. And maybe we can extrapolate them out more broadly. But Kim, why are you all at H&M concerned about greenhouse gases?
I think we all are humans. We have families, and we care about the planet and the future of the planet. I mean, that's the basics. If you want to go more into, from a corporate perspective, we're of course concerned about the long-term financial sustainability also. If there's no people, there will be no profit or no future for us as a company. We also know that the people or customer are getting more and more aware of these emissions, or if it's 3 or 8%, but a big part of it is coming from our industry. The awareness is raising, customers start taking decisions based on that, and we need to adjust our way of producing garments so that we can continue to be attractive for our customers. Otherwise, we will not exist.
And I'm, from our work together, there's a lot of sort of business reasons that are also pressuring companies like yours to take action, right? In your supply chains, as you say, there could be places where you're now sourcing your clothes where they're produced, like a Bangladesh, who they've assumed will, if climate change continues unabated, will potentially be significant parts underwater. Am I right? And the climate refugees will mean that people who are working in the textile industry will have to move. There won't be that basis there. So there's those things. And then my understanding is that investors, aren't they? The financial sector?
Investors are awakening. They are maybe not to the pace I would hope for. But I mean, they are starting to ask the questions. You have these big organizations to do, or watchdogs or NGOs, following it up and pushing hard on companies such as ours, which I think is great. It needs to be questioned in every possible way so that we can move ahead.
And so tell us, give us some figures here. How much greenhouse gases does H&M create as of your latest analysis?
So I mean, last year we reported 17.7 million tons.
Does that mean
that's a
anything
number.
to you,
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, if we compare it with something, I think all Swedes' air travels before Corona added up to about 10 million tons. So, and we reported 17 million in 1 year. So that's a lot of emission. Of course, our way of measuring this is not perfect. We don't pretend that it is. It will be better and better going forward. So let's see what happens with this data going forward. But still, we're a big part of the problem, and we need to change how we produce things.
And so you set an ambitious climate target.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So 4 years ago, we set out to become climate positive no later than 2040. And we have a partial target of becoming climate neutral in 2030 in our supply chain. So those are the big milestones for us.
Okay,
so it's quite long term.
And climate positive means what?
Climate positive for us means that we're going to live up to the 1.5 degree target. We're going to halve our emissions in 10 years, and then we're going to halve them again until 2040.
Okay.
And then we're going to do more than that.
So you do everything you need to take responsibility in line with 1.5.
Yeah,
And then
that's
you
our
also
part.
go beyond that to do more to help the rest of
Yeah,
the
through
world, the industry.
through different types of compensatory activities.
Okay, so things like offsetting.
Yeah, but the focus for us is really about decarbonization and reducing emissions. That's what we want to talk about, and that's where we want to have the dialogue.
Okay, so I think this idea of doing more than what you cause is quite interesting, and we've talked about that in Sweden, that can Sweden do that as well as an industry? So tell us, update us, so what are you doing to achieve that briefly? What do you have to focus on?
Briefly.
It's
Okay.
incredibly complex.
We're basically overlooking everything from how we organize ourselves, our business model, where our future revenues will come from, how we source, where we source, the way we put demands on our suppliers, how many suppliers we have, can we reduce the amount of suppliers, how can we get a bigger commitment to the suppliers and put different demands and work with them in a partnership instead of, or more in a partnership than we're already doing.
But you know, Sandra talked about the energy sources.
Yeah.
So this is really about getting these places that you have relationships with who produce, who are based on coal, right? Energy. How are you going to get them to go to renewable energy?
I mean, the biggest, absolute most difficult thing, as Sandra said, is the wet processing, which is for us tier 2. It's 2 steps away from us.
So dyeing and finishing. And
exactly. And we normally don't do any business with them. Some of the biggest factories have both tier 1 and tier 2, but normally we don't have any official business agreement with them. And we're also a very small part of their total business. So our impact on them is very limited, and that's the biggest challenge we're working on right now, because we don't have all the answers on how to get out of that situation.
How to influence them, or to
how to influence them and how to support them. I mean,
that's a better word.
Yeah, because we need to get to them through our tier 1 suppliers mainly.
Okay.
And
so that's a big challenge.
That's the biggest.
Is there anything you're excited about? Have you made any progress since you started working that gives you some sense of hope?
Well, what we have done now for more than a year is extensive mapping, because before you do the measuring like everything, you're kind of blind. You can guess and you can go on estimates and so on, but before you have the real data, you can't really take well-based decisions on where to focus your energy and resources, because everyone has limited resources. We're trying to figure out where can we get most bang for the buck, so to speak, but from a CO2 perspective.
Okay. So let me bring in Sandra, and Malin, I promise we're going to get to you. You're being very patient. Very lovely. Sandra, what is Kappahl? Kappahl has a roadmap, right, to get to 50% reductions by 2030, which is basically what we all have to do on the way to net zero emissions by 2050. So can you just quickly name the pillars of your strategy at Kappahl?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we all have the same pillars, right? There are 3 major pillars that we stand on. And the first one is, of course, a switch to renewable energy. And the second one is more efficient processes. And that's maybe my hot topic, that we should switch to more efficient and less polluting and also more energy efficient processes. And the third one is that we need to reduce consumption, and that we have to do by finding new business models. And I think sort of the beauty in this is that if we collaborate on getting our suppliers switching to renewable energy, if we collaborate on investing in new technology, and if we collaborate in communicating to consumers,
Let me ask you
so much further.
I'm jumping in and interrupting a little bit, but this idea of new business models, it brings up the idea of circularity, and everyone who's at least switched down a little bit to sustainability in textiles hears the word circular business models, circularity. What, Sandra, just clarify, what's the link between circularity, which is when often you're reusing, when textile waste equals a chance to use new, to make new clothes from that, but also to recycle and reuse all your resources along the way. What is the link, and how can we be distracted by circularity when it comes to climate?
Did you say distracted?
I said distracted.
Yes. Well, I mean, circularity there's no definition. So yes, sometimes we are distracted because everyone puts their own meaning into it. Some put resource efficiency, some put only recycling, some put bio-based economy, some non-toxic environment could be part of circular economy. So it can be all or very little. But I think we should know that materials are a small part of the climate emissions globally. The main part of the fossil resources, coal, oil, and gas, they are used as fuel. So we cannot circulate materials if it costs us a lot of fossil fuel, right? Because then we get more climate emissions. But to circulate, for example, via reuse, repair, reuse garments, that's sort of a really good tool. As for each time we don't have to produce a new garment, we save all the climate impact from the production of that garment. So in that way, I think circularity and looking at things as it's not this linear make and use and throw away. In that way, I think giving all products one more lifetime is one key. Yes.
Okay, and so Kim, to wrap up a little bit about H&M, I'm just conscious that you have this very ambitious goal that is probably inspiring other companies to set a higher standard. You're part of a science-based targets initiative, which also is going to require you to show that you're reducing along a certain pathway. Is it 2 degrees still, or is it 1.5?
For own operation, it's 1.5.
Right, okay. If H&M does all this work with the resources it has and gets the climate positive, it's not going to make much difference if the rest of the industry doesn't do it. So what is your view, at least I would argue, what is your view on how you help the rest of the industry transform itself?
I mean, I think bigger companies, regardless of what kind of industry, has a bigger responsibility to lead the change, because it basically we got us to where we are, and now we also have to take a bigger responsibility to get us back to where we need to be, basically. I don't know if that was an answer to your question.
But I guess you all are actively working not just with your own sort of solutions, but trying to...
No.
When it comes to energy, you need to work with governments on their...
I mean, as Sandra said, none of our goals can really be reached unless we collaborate with other competitors and cross-industry. We have to work closely with pushing for upgraded policies in many of the countries where we source. We do that actively locally with our staff on site, and also we work on an EU level to push for policy changes and stronger climate for a climate impact.
Okay, so
that is basically what has to happen. It doesn't really matter if we reach our targets and nobody else does it. And it doesn't matter if Inditex reach their target and nobody else does it.
I mean, you once told me you could imagine visiting some of your partners in a protection country and seeing that they're doing everything well, but a factory right next door is doing everything dirty, so to speak. And so that can't be the solution. So I'm going to jump in and find them. Thank you. There's Malin, in terms of the customer.
Yes.
Tell us, what is the customer's role? Because I know a lot of people listening probably think, oh, this is so energy technical, but I'm interested in the customers, the design, the user phase. Talk about that from your experience.
Absolutely. I mean, the customer is really important within this equation. And I mean, as Sandra presented, looking at climate impact from the Swedish fashion consumption, we have the biggest direct impact from consumer on transport. That is, taking the car to the store. That is, we're talking about direct impact.
Okay.
But then the indirect impact, I would say we need to work on prolonging the active lifespan of clothes already produced.
Okay, okay. And so, Sandra said, what percent of a sort of a garment's life cycle, if you can remind us, is greenhouse gases from consumer use and use?
So, I mean, it depends on how you see it, but okay, so 80% is within the production chain.
Yeah.
So the rest of it is consumer,
Depending
really.
on which country is the degree,
Yeah,
okay.
it's a little bit dependent on, so therefore I couldn't be precise, but yes.
Okay.
Looking at Sweden, we have 11% in consumer transport.
Okay.
We have about 3% in wash and dry.
Okay,
However, we can affect the 80% in production, even as a consumer.
okay, tell us how that works.
So, if we prolong the active lifetime of the garments we already have, say you use a garment twice as long as you normally would, then you could lower the climate impact of that garment by 50%, dependent that you don't buy another garment to replace it, if you
Okay.
see what I mean there.
I
So
think-
it's really about, you know, finding new ways, new business models to use what's already produced.
So this is where sort of rental and
Yes.
and hiring and those kinds of things come in.
Yes, absolutely.
Because if you just extend the life of your product, your clothing, but you buy new stuff, you're not reducing the overall consumption.
Exactly.
But if you are in a business model that allows you to rent it and you don't increase the amount of items that you're
Exactly.
buying, you have an opportunity. And so that's a little bit why a lot of companies are talking about new business models, aren't they? Can we get that into our core way of working and make money by continuing to sell the same thing a number of times over long periods of time?
Yeah.
Could, if we displace new items, lead to something unique. Is that right?
I would say so, yes.
Okay. So is there anything more you want to say about how customers who are listening or brands who want to work with customers could help them reduce their climate impact? And what are you doing as part of
I mean, there's a lot of things that you can do, obviously. The first step is obviously to be aware,
Okay.
to listen to you, listen
not.
to the climate debate that is ongoing.
Yeah.
However, we still see, I would say, a gap between attitude and actual behavior.
Okay.
So I think everyone should challenge themselves to actually go out and rent the next garment.
Aha.
You know, to take that action.
So are there enough opportunities to do that today? I mean, those are more and more than there ever have been, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely business models popping up everywhere. So, I mean, maybe it's not possible in every city in the world, but it is possible in some. So I think we should just challenge ourselves a little bit more to go that extra mile.
Okay. So what's another thing?
I mean, you could then obviously upgrade what's already in your own wardrobe.
Okay.
Yeah. So Sandra spoke about remake.
Right.
Super important. What else is there? Well, I already said, please use the bike, if possible.
Right. So when you're buying your clothes, instead of driving your car on benzene, on gas, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
And I know that's not possible for everyone, depending on where you live.
Yeah.
But it's an easy switch for a lot of us.
Okay. So, of course, it'll be even easier if there's an incentive for companies to make it easy for customers,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
And so, Kim and Sandra, as industry representatives, how much do you think about these new business models when thinking about your solutions? Is this something on the front of your agenda? Kim, maybe I'll start with you.
Absolutely. New business models has been on the front of our agenda for more than a year now. It's an absolute focus area for us. And I mean, we are doing investments in startups, in innovation companies, in material companies, in reselling companies, and we we have a very strong belief in that it will be the future for us. That part of our business will continue to grow.
Okay. Sandra, I don't know if you had any reflections on that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's one of the solutions, right? And Capel has started very slowly, or small, I should say, with renting out one baptizing dress, dopklänning. Don't know if that was the right word. But they're also considering more renting and also collecting garments in the stores for resale and reuse. So small steps, yes, and in the strategy there are more to come.
Okay. So let's switch it up a little bit because we have about 10 minutes or so left. I'm curious about a number of things. I mean, there's so much we can talk about. So I'm going to quickly run through a bunch of things, and all I want you to do is answer yes, no, or maybe. Then we'll see if there's any area that's sort of extra interesting. Okay. So my first question is, should we phase out polyester?
No.
No.
It's
No.
okay.
Do you mean fossil polyester, Mike, or do you also mean recycled and bio-based polyester?
Okay, because some would argue polyester made with oil and such should be phased out.
It depends.
Okay, depends. Is our industry currently set up to get to climate positive by 2040?
No.
No.
How close are we? That's not a yes, no, maybe question.
We need to speed up the process.
Dramatically.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the pace is the problem.
The
Yeah.
pace. Okay. Do we need much more robust legislation and policy to speed this up process?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to come back to you on that. Are our politicians aware and doing enough? I guess the answer is no. Can I answer it for us?
Well, you said two questions there. Are they aware or
Yeah.
are they doing enough?
Are they aware?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Are they doing enough?
But the thing is that the politicians in Europe and Sweden, they don't have the mandate in the producing countries, and that's where the real problems are. So I think there's a problem with European laws, Swedish laws.
Okay.
Also, we shouldn't divide it up into we and them.
No.
I think we're all in the same position here. So, I
Right.
mean, it's not the politicians or the companies or the consumer. It's all of us.
But it is, we can say, an EU bloc, and then we
Yeah.
have countries where a lot of the clothes are produced, and we need to have those relationships and support, as you were talking about. Okay. Do we need something called carbon pricing to make
Yes.
sure that...
Yes.
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 Okay. That's a sexy topic, carbon
That's the
pricing.
biggest yes so
The
far.
biggest yes. So
Yeah.
we need to basically internalize the cost that we're now externalizing, so that
Yeah.
things cost what they should.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. What about this carbon offsetting? And you talked about it, Kim. But there's a number of textile companies, fashion companies, who've gone out and said, "I'm climate neutral." How did they do it? They did it by buying carbon credits or offsets. Do we think that is a good way of addressing the problem?
No.
Positive, but it
So
really
you-
demands radical
So
transparency.
you meant maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I still want it to be positive.
Yeah, yes.
With those three choices, I go with no.
Okay. Sandra?
Yeah, I said no too. I think, I mean, if you work with offsetting perhaps in your own supply chain, so installing wind power in your own supply chain instead of installing wind power plants in Bolivia, then I think it could
Okay.
be. So maybe, but I will go for no because
Okay.
the lack of transparency.
Interesting. Should we be labeling products with carbon greenhouse gas labeling like Allbirds is working to do?
Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And this is quite important, I think, and this is, everything's evolved. We now know about our climate impact. Should it be the standard that every company working in textiles, commercial company, has to set a science-based target for climate action and be transparent and work towards meeting that goal? Should that be the new standard?
Yes.
SBTI.
SBTI or a similar kind of method?
Maybe.
Yes, but again, transparency and who will actually.
Follow up? Or,
Yeah.
I go with maybe.
Okay. Sandra?
Well, I said yes, so it's between yes and maybe. Yeah, but I'll go with yes.
And
Yes.
I don't understand why you're saying maybe, but we don't have so much. We only have a couple more minutes left. But if I could weigh in again, I mean, if we know this is such a critical issue, right? It's so urgent. It drives a lot of the other sustainability challenges. Shouldn't it be a prerequisite that if you're working in this industry, you have to work with climate action at that level? And if you didn't, should you really be in the game?
Yeah.
You know, I guess that's my.
We're back to like legislational or jurisdictional areas. I mean, who is going to tell the people in Malta that they have to follow this law? I don't know.
Okay. So let us think about Sweden now, because we only have a couple more minutes left here. We're in Stockholm. What can Sweden or the Swedish even apparel or fashion industry do to be leaders in this area? And I want you to be serious about this. What could we do to take the baton and accelerate this that's moving too slow, as you all said? So let me start with you, Malin. What do you think is one thing we could do in the next year or whatever that could really move the agenda on this?
Well, I think that we do need legislation that will prolong the active lifespan of clothing, because we don't have production in Sweden right now. So that means what we can do right here is make sure that the clothes that are produced and are in our wardrobe are being used. So making sure that repairs are accessible and remake and all of those other kind of business models that supports the industry are on point and available.
Okay. So really getting legislation to make it worthwhile to invest in those
Which
kinds
is
of models.
already happening, but I would say we need even more.
Okay. Kim?
That's a great input. I would then add on that they could start at least talking about a carbon price, putting a price on carbon, because that only, even if the government started talking about it, companies would act on it quite quickly.
Okay.
So that is something
you
that
love
I would
the
like to see.
carbon price.
Yes.
Okay. Well, we'll come back to that in another session maybe. And Sandra, what do you think? What's your one thing?
From the industry side, I'd say collaborate. And I think that STICA, the Swedish Textile Initiative on Climate Action, is a very good example of that. And I'm so proud that Kappa was part of initiating it. Because we have the same challenges, and it will be easier if we collaborate in the supply chains and with business models to make the consumers aware and not so confused.
Great. So with that, I'd like to wrap up. I want to thank you all for contributing your knowledge. This is obviously a very complex topic that we could spend hours on. We've tried to give a view of what you all think and what I think needs to happen. But I would recommend for those who are listening to start to Google some reports that are coming out, because there's a lot of structured, robust information out there. As I said, a McKinsey report is coming out on Thursday. Stand.earth has done a report. You can look at STICA, the Swedish Textile Initiative. You can look at the UN Charter for Climate Action. There's a lot of things going on, and some things are more targeted towards those of you running companies on how you actually concretely work with this, and other things are more geared towards those of you who are advocacy organizations or working with policy or those things. So we only touched upon a little of the things, but we hope that we can continue driving this conversation over the course of the next year through Sweden and globally. So thank you very much for coming, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.